Buffalo Bills mandatory minicamp starts on Tuesday, June 13th, and I'm breaking down what I'm watching for today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single show, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Well, folks, it's a big week for the Buffalo Bills. Mandatory minicamp begins Tuesday, June 13th. And so this will be our last week of the Bills being together for the offseason program before they take about 6 weeks off, and then they report to training camp. And so a lot of big updates this week. There's a lot to pay attention to. And on today's episode, I want to share with you what I'm looking for, the top storylines, if you will, for the Bills entering minicamp and what I think is the most important stuff to pay attention to. And so in segment one, I want to focus in on some general talking points and the two biggest storylines. Segment two will focus on the rest of the offense. Segment three will focus on the rest of the defense. So let's start with some general thoughts on things to monitor during the Bills' mandatory OTAs. And I stress the word mandatory because attendance is mandatory, no more voluntary. If you're one of the 90 players under contract with the Buffalo Bills, you are expected to be there. And if you miss, the fines are pretty significant. And so let's review those fines. If you miss the first day, you're fined $16,459. If you miss the second day, you're fined $32,920. And if you miss the third day, you're fined $49,374. So if you miss all 3 days, you are fined $98,753. So if somebody's not there, it's costly to them, and it's for a reason. We just saw Connor Williams, the center for the Miami Dolphins, hold out of mandatory minicamp for the Dolphins, and he accumulated those fines. Now, it is Brandon Beane's expectation, as he communicated last week, it is my expectation that all 90 players will be there. But if somebody's not there, know that it's a pretty big deal. If you remember last year, the big conversation was about Jordan Poyer and his contract status. And, he had not attended the voluntary stuff. A lot of questions about, if he'd show up for the mandatory stuff. He did. And we saw how that kind of resolved itself. But pay attention to attendance. If somebody's not there, we'll get to that somebody that we'll be mindful of. Then it's something to be concerned about. So attendance is obviously something big to pay attention to. Number two is health, right? Who isn't participating in full? These are guys that are still working back from injury. And so I think about players like Von Miller, Tommy Doyle, Jordan Phillips. What is their activity level like? We've seen Mitch Morse not participate in full, just kind of being mindful of who isn't participating in full. And that'll give us a good understanding of entering training camp, which players we still need to be mindful of. Also, you want to stay healthy, right? You don't want to have any injuries during the OTAs, which are scheduled for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. They almost always cancel the last day. Every team will cancel their last day. So I'm not anticipating the Bills actually having mandatory OTAs on Thursday. I think it'll be a Tuesday and Wednesday situation. And so fingers crossed, all the good vibes towards the Bills not having any injuries this week. I'm also paying a lot of attention to who guys are lining up with and against. Now, one thing that you have to be mindful of is that the beat reporters that are in attendance for these practices are very limited on what they can say. They're not going to tell you that O'Cyrus Torrence lined up with the second team offensive line at right guard. That will not be there. But they will tell you things like O'Cyrus Torrence blocked on a play and he combo blocked with Mitch Morse, and the ball carrier was James Cook, who made Matt Milano miss in the hole. Okay, well, guess what? That's a first-team rep, right? There's enough clues there. You'll also hear things like Christian Benford was defending Desmond Patton on a throw from Matt Barkley. And you know that was a third-team rep, right? So I am paying a lot of attention in scouring through the practice reports that we typically get from Matt Marino, Sal Capaccio, John Scott, Joe Biscaglia, to find out that type of information. And then, through that, you can kind of get an understanding of which positions and with what players guys are lining up with to give you an idea of where their status is on the depth chart. I'm also interested in who we aren't hearing about. This is not a full contact session. And so it's not that meaningful to have big takeaways for the O-line and the D-line. But there are positions that I think you can pop, right? You could stand out if you're an offensive skill player or if you're a defensive back seven player. Of course, we're looking for the standouts and who everybody's buzzing about, but I'm also interested in who they're not talking about, right? Who's not getting any commentary about what they're doing, whether it's good or bad. That means they're just kind of blending in. They're not standing out. And so I'm mindful of who's standing out, but also who we're not really hearing about. So those are the general items. But let me now get into my number one and number two top things that I'm paying attention to over the next few days. And then, like I said, we'll get into the offensive side of the ball and the defensive side of the football. But for my primary top two items to look for, one is on offense and one is on defense. So we'll start with offense. I think the biggest storyline right now for the Buffalo Bills entering this OTA session is Stefon Diggs. It's the first time that we're going to see him around the facility since the Bills' playoff loss to the Bengals. It's the first time that we're going to hear from him, through the lens of the local media. His attendance, his demeanor, all of that is going to be very significant. And I'm interested in what he has to say. I'm interested in what his teammates and coaches have to say about him. I'm interested in any reports that we get about his practice demeanor. If it's same old Steph, if there's a difference, that is something that I think is critical. That's the number one storyline for me. Also, think about it like this. I mean, Josh Allen and the rest of these Bills offensive players have been working together for a few months now, right? There's been several workout sessions. There's been the OTAs, right? The few weeks of OTAs that have already happened. And, Josh Allen's out there throwing passes to Gabe Davis and Trent Shefield and Deonte Harty and, the regular cast of characters. Well, all of a sudden, here comes Stefon Diggs, right? It's their first time together. Has Stefon Diggs ever met Trent Shefield or Deonte Harty or Justin Shorter? All of a sudden, this is the alpha guy. This is your number one receiver, the focal point of your offense, and he ain't been there. And now he is, right? How does that all mesh together? I think everybody understands who Steph Diggs is and his status on the team and all of that, but it's the first time in 2023 that he'll be together with this group. And so I am very anxious to hear all about Stefon Diggs and hear from Stefon Diggs and, how he's going to be challenged through the press. So Stefon Diggs is my very obvious top storyline for the Bills entering this OTA session. On defense, and this to me is the number two biggest talking point for me during this OTA session, is the cornerback 2 competition, mainly Kaiir Elam, right? I think this is a very, very interesting situation. Bills' first-round pick. We know that last year, Trey White was injured to start the season. He was on the PUP list. And so Dane Jackson was the presumed starter. And then it was, all right, is it going to be Kaiir Elam next to him? No, it winds up being Christian Benford. At least, he got the first reps in week 1 and, rotated in regularly, had his own injuries, but, it was pretty much a rotation between Kaiir Elam, Christian Benford, Dane Jackson. Trey White comes back. You kind of sprinkle in Xavier Woods, right? You're just this revolving door at CB2. All the while, I'm quite satisfied every time Kaiir Elam's on the field. I think he plays quite well. And he's obviously a first-round pick. You have a premium asset invested in him. And you're hopeful that this is your answer opposite of Tre'Davious White. And while I thought he showed enough last year for me to believe that he should enter this year as a CB2 and really develop the player. And he certainly got supreme physical talent and ball skills. And so I'm really intrigued by him. The reality is it seems like there's absolutely a competition right now between Elam, Jackson, and Benford to be the starter opposite of Tre'Davious White. And I've speculated that, maybe this has less to do with Kaiir Elam and more to do with Dane Jackson and Christian Benford and them proving to the coaching staff that they deserve to be in the mix. And, maybe Kaiir Elam's right there with him, but he's not ahead and nobody's really ahead. And so they're really trying to sort it out and see who can claim the spot. Maybe that is real. Maybe Kaiir Elam is a player that they want to make sure he earns it. And while he's the favorite, they expect him to be the starter. They want to make sure that nothing's being handed to him. I think we saw that kind of happen with Matt Milano, with him rotating as a rookie with Ramon Humber. And then even at this point, year 2 of his career, you're wondering, is Matt Milano going to be the full-time guy? And then, kind of resolves itself. Will the same thing happen here? I want it to. I want Kaiir Elam to be the CB2 for a number of reasons, partly because of what the Bills have invested in him, but also he is the highest upside play. He's athletically and physically just there's more there than you have from Dane Jackson or Christian Benford, and obviously the ball skills. He's the highest upside option. And so to me, I'd want to lean into that and see what I can unlock in that player. And so I think it's great that they have the depth that they do, but I really want to see Kaiir Elam be this guy. Now, if he doesn't deserve it, he doesn't deserve it. If Benford or Jackson's better, they're better. Like, I can live with that. But I want to see Elam have every opportunity to claim this job. And it seems like it's going to be a big storyline throughout, obviously minicamp this week, but, training camp, and everyone's in attendance and, everyone as in fans, and you're getting a lot more information. It's something that we're going to be monitoring for, it seems like, the next few months. All right, we got a bunch more to get to here in just a second, but first I need to tell you about FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And there's so much to love about betting over at FanDuel. They have great promotions every day. It's a safe and secure, easy-to-use app. You get paid instantly, and there's tons of action that you can get in on, whether it's the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup playoffs in the NHL, Major League Baseball's in full swing. You've got football's futures bets. You name it, you can find it over at America's #1 sportsbook, where there's simply no better place to bet on all the sports action. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, with the general talking points, Stefon Diggs and the CB2 competition out of the way, I want to focus in on the rest of the things to look for. And in this segment, we'll focus in on the offensive side of the football. And I think these are in order of most significance, but I do have Dalton Kincaid written down as #1. I've really enjoyed the practice reports and feedback from beat reporters, players, coaches, as it relates to Dalton Kincaid, even Brandon Beane, and what they've commented about his approach and how he's attacking things and how he's settling in, and how the route running and hands and ball skills and body control is all flashing in practice. And it really feels like it's ramped up, especially if you kind of follow Matt Marino's commentary. The first session that was available for the media to observe, not a lot of targets for Dalton Kincaid in the team drills. But then the next 2 weeks, you saw that really ramp up and getting 5 and 6 targets per session during the team drills. And those passes coming from Josh Allen and him being defended by Matt Milano and Jordan Poyer, that type of stuff is really encouraging. It's nice to see him kind of ramp up. It's nice to see him getting opportunity with the Bills' first-team offense against the Bills' first-team defense. And so Dalton Kincaid, first-round pick, want every piece of information I can possibly get. And it feels like it's all very, very positive. And I just want to continue to see things continue to trend in that direction of him having an important role for this football team and him fulfilling the promise that you get from a first-round pick. So Dalton Kincaid's another big item for me to pay attention to over the next few days. I know I talked about Stefon Diggs, but there's other storylines with the wide receivers that very much intrigue me. Obviously, Stefon Diggs stepping into this situation for the first time this year for Josh Allen to have his full complement of skill players. That's going to be intriguing. But with that in mind, with Steph Diggs in the mix and Gabe Davis, and of course, what we're expecting to see happen at tight end with Kincaid and Knox, where do things fall for guys like Deonte Harty, Trent Shefield, Khalil Shakir? And all three of those players are interesting for different reasons. It feels like Trent Shefield was the big beneficiary of Steph Diggs not being around. And it seems like there's been some nice rapport developed with Josh Allen, a lot of love for Trent Shefield from the coaches and players just based on his practice habits and the work ethic, the things that we kind of knew were true about him when the Bills signed him. It's nice to see that happen and come to fruition very, very quickly. How does things impact Trent Shefield and where does he fall into this pecking order in the passing game? Same thing with Deonte Harty, who is a very intriguing slot option with a lot of speed and yards after catch skill. What are we hearing about him and his role and who he's catching passes from and where he's lining up? That's going to be very intriguing to me to see how that settles. But then also Khalil Shakir, who I'm very high on, had a day 2 grade on him in last year's draft, had some flashy moments. You look at the playoffs, and Shakir was pretty involved, had a big game against Pittsburgh. He's had a lot of flashy moments, and he was on the field quite a bit. He didn't catch a ton of passes last year, but his percentage of time on the field was pretty high, all things considered. And so, he's got a year of time on task ahead of Harty and Shefield. What is his role going to look like? And I think we'll start to get some clues on that this week. There's some offensive line stuff that intrigues me. Right guard. Do we have a legit competition here between Ryan Bates, Osiris Torrence, and David Edwards to be the right guard? You feel like Bates is the incumbent, a guy that's in year 2 of a 4-year contract. He's got a real chance to be that. I feel like with Mitch Morse missing some time during the OTAs based on some of the pictures that I scour to see where guys are lining up, it feels like Bates has been the center. And so if Morse is ready to go, does Bates kick back over to right guard? Where does Torrance settle in? Does David Edwards have a chance here? All of that is very, very intriguing to me, in addition to just this overall offensive line picture, right? We know that they like to play guys in different spots, especially during this time, right? This is your opportunity to get exposures to players in new roles. This is where you tinker and, try out different combinations. What type of information can we glean from these practices about where guys are lining up? I remember last year at this time learning about Tommy Doyle playing guard. And, my initial reaction to that was, wow, that's really crazy. I never thought of him as a guy that would play guard. Well, guess what? Week 3 against Miami, the guy played right guard for the Buffalo Bills in a game. And so getting a feel for some of those competitions and how this is all going to come together, what the puzzle looks like, where they're trying players out. I want as much of that information as I can possibly get. The last thing that I'll mention regarding the offense that I think is interesting to me is Kaiir Elam, the Bills' backup quarterback. He's QB2. He's we are one snap away from Kaiir Elam being the starter. And he's played a decent amount of football. He's had some ups and downs. He's had some tough situations to try to play football in. And I'm anxious to see how this all plays out. We know that he's tight with Josh Allen. I'm sure Josh has done everything that he can to kind of get him up to speed and make sure that Kyle is in position to step in and play if he can. But, what type of information are we getting about how the offense looks when he's in there. Do we get positive feedback about good throws and moving the football with consistency when Kyle Allen's on the field? Because, there's a part of me that would love for Kyle Allen to just settle in and be the QB2, right? I mean, you've seen backup quarterbacks kind of stick in spots for a number of years, and I think Kyle Allen might be that for the Bills. I don't think there's a world where Kyle Allen's going to be a starter in the NFL or even a highly paid backup. But if he can latch on with the Bills with his friend Josh Allen and provide value to this Bills quarterback room, and you feel comfortable with him stepping in, can the Bills commit to him for an extended period of time and feel good about him as your backup quarterback? Or is it going to be a yearly situation where the Bills are just continuing to bring in somebody for a year? And we've seen this happen now for 3 consecutive years with Mitchell Trubisky to Case Keenum to now Kyle Allen. Can Kyle Allen be the foreseeable future QB2, which then I think allows you to be more willing to draft quarterbacks that are more developmental? You can kind of see if you can catch lightning in a bottle with one of these guys. That the new rule allows you to dress them on game day and then not count against your active roster. There's some benefits there. And so I think part of that, though, is Kyle Allen maybe being able to settle in as a reliable backup, maybe on an extended deal. And I think we start to really get a feel for Kyle Allen this week. So that's definitely something offensively that I will be paying attention to. All right, there's a bunch of stuff on defense and a little special teams nugget that I want to get into right after a very quick break. I'll be right back. All right, we got some defensive and special teams talking points to get into, but first I would like to invite you to join the Locked On Bills subtext community, something new that we are offering. Been talking about it here regularly on the podcast. If you want to check it out, there is a link in the show notes for today to join. So if you're on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast, you can check out the show notes. You'll find a link, and you get a lot of cool stuff with the Locked On Bills subtext community. My favorite part is very easily the one-on-one text conversations. So I get questions pretty regularly from text subscribers, and we go back and forth. We talk about the team. We talk about favorite players, the past games we've attended. It's been really, really cool getting to know you guys more and me kind of allowing me to share more of myself with you. So that's been my favorite part. You get herd mentality priority. You get some exclusive content, regular Bills musings, text, my first reaction to all Bills news. So, they signed Cam Dantzler and extended Ed Oliver and signed Leonard Floyd. When that stuff happened, my first thought went to the subtext subscribers. We've done a giveaway already. So we got a lot of cool stuff going through the Locked On Bills subtext community. So check it out. There's a link in today's show notes. And again, nothing changes at all with the normal delivery of this podcast as you've always enjoyed it. It's just an extra layer of engagement for anybody who might want it. All right, let's close out here by focusing in on what I'm focused in on for the defensive side of the football during OTAs. And I think that top item is the middle linebacker competition. It's been quite the journey here over the last 6 months of thinking about the Bills paying Tremaine Edmunds and really talking yourself into not letting him out the door as a 5-year starter and captain and Pro Bowler, and how they talk about who he is and how he's the leader of the defense and how important that role is, to him signing with the Chicago Bears and to the Bills really not doing anything to replace him, right? It's been, okay, Terrell Bernard, we drafted you in the 3rd round last year. Let's do it again this year. We'll draft Dorian Williams in the 3rd round. We'll bring back A.J. Klein. Tyrel Dotson, you've been around for a while. Let's see what you can do. And somehow, some way between these players, we're going to have this critical piece of our defense fulfilled that's important for the communication and making sure everyone's lined up and everyone has the right calls, right? So it's been quite the journey, and we're getting closer and closer to the Bills needing to kind of figure out who that player is going to be. And I know that you don't want to put a time frame on it. You don't want to be married to when you have to make a decision, but there is a lot of benefit to figuring out who that player is going to be and allowing them to settle into that role and get the defensive huddle used to hearing his voice and, getting this player more and more reps and opportunities to communicate and call the defense and do all this stuff that's so critical. And so that competition is front and center, right? Excited to see what happens. I could talk myself into Tyrel Dotson as the most experienced player. in the scheme. I could talk myself into Terrell Bernard as the youngest player that has a little bit of time on task, that played a little last year. I could talk myself into Dorian Williams as kind of the hot name, the new name, the third rounder, the guy with all the tackling production, the guy that we thought was going to be Matt Milano's backup, that Sean McDermott since informed us that he's starting out at middle linebacker, right? So there's a lot of intrigue there. And so, I'm glued to any piece of information that we can get about the middle linebacker competition. Von Miller, right? This is a big talking point, and in a future episode here, probably within the next week or so, I'm going to talk to Dr. Kyle Trimble about all this Von Miller news and all the other Bills injury news. But he is talking big. He was at his pass rusher summit this past weekend in Las Vegas and came out and said, look, my knee is fully healed. Now I'm just focusing in on, the football side of things and, really hyping up the chances that he's going to be available week 1, right? You get that from Von. Von's a very positive guy. He talks a big game. I don't know how to take it all, right? We told us for so long that Odell Beckham Jr. was going to be a Bill, and Odell Beckham Jr. didn't sign with anybody, and then he signed with the Ravens. I think that Von's all positive. I'll believe it when I see him active for week 1. I don't think it's going to happen. I think we're going to see him week 5, week 6. I still believe that. And whether that's the Bills kind of just making sure Von's all the way back and not necessarily needing him early on in the season and realizing what it meant to not have him late in the year in 2022 and wanting to make sure that you don't do that again in 2023. I think there's a number of reasons that it makes sense for Von Miller to not be available in week 1. I think that messaging from him is very positive towards week 1. You've even kind of heard Brandon Beane talk about it. Man, I'd be really surprised. But obviously he'll be around, he'll talk, and we'll get more and more clues and intel. Now, here's the challenge. If he is fully cleared, if he's fully healthy, he can't start the year on the PUP list. And so that's a little subplot here to pay attention to over the next few weeks. I'm also very interested in the defensive line combinations. This is a very deep situation, especially on the edge. You've got Von Miller and Greg Rousseau and Leonard Floyd, and you still got A.J. Epinesa and Boogie Basham and Shaq Lawson and Shane Ray. There's so many players. It's a great, great situation to see it all play out. And I remember last year when Von went down and it was Greg Rousseau and the starter opposite of him was Shaq Lawson. Well, how does this all shake out this year? So, do we get the best version yet of Boogie Basham in year 3, that all critical year 3 that Sean McDermott talks about? A.J. Epinesa, contract year, 6.5 sacks last year. Shaq Lawson, another year back with the team. Shane Ray, high upside, right? A lot of intrigue. Like, how does this all shake out? I'm interested in all of that. That's very, very, very intriguing to me. It's exciting to see it play out and see the Bills have to kind of sort it out. I'm also extremely interested in Taylor Rapp, the Bills' third safety. You've got some nuggets from the first few OTA sessions about him being on the field and making an impact and running around and always being around the football. You've gotten that, especially, Sal Capaccio's kind of talked about that quite a bit. Does that momentum continue? Do the Bills really get versatile or diverse with defensive personnel in ways that we really haven't seen them under Sean McDermott, right? This is that first player that you think about, wow, in sub packages and certain looks, you can really unleash this player and do some things you've never done defensively. And what does that look like and how does that come together? I'm anxious to see it with Taylor Rapp. And so I think we'll get more clues about his role within this defense. And so that's going to be quite interesting to me, on top of what we talked about in the opening segment about the CB2 competition. So a lot of intriguing things with this football team. And I think there's just more competition than there's ever been. I think the Bills have had a lot of talent. They've had deep, good rosters. But, I mean, some of this is really, really intense in terms of these battles at cornerback, at linebacker, at right guard. How do they incorporate this depth that they have? How do they sort through which 9 offensive linemen and which 5 edge rushers? And all of that's so interesting to me. This is the deepest and most competitive roster that Brandon Beane's put together. And with that comes some really good consequences and a lot for us to pay attention to during OTAs. And then, of course, once we get to training camp in the preseason. Last thing that I'll say here is a little special teams nugget. The returner situation's not quite last year at this point in time where, no Andre Roberts, and we're all nervous about Isaiah McKenzie and wondering about Marquez Stevenson and can Khalil Shakir do it? This time around, the Bills are pretty set at returner with Nyheim Hines, and then, of course, Deonte Harty, who's been a big-time impact guy in that capacity. Not quite as secure with the football as we've seen with Nyheim Hines, but the explosive returns have absolutely been there for Deonte Harty, and you still have Khalil Shakir. And so I'm really interested in this returner situation and how the Bills deploy both Hines and Harty. Is it really just a Hines situation? Where does Shakir factor in? It's a good discussion this time around because you have good players as opposed to last year. You're just kind of palms of the air wondering how the heck this isn't going to turn into a disaster. And then, we had some issues and saw the Bills trade for Nyheim Hines, and, Jameson Crowder was part of the mix last year, and we really didn't expect that to happen, but then he winds up being the punt returner, gets hurt. So interested in see how that all shakes out this year. All right, folks, that's it. OTAs, they're starting mandatory. A lot to pay attention to as we went through over the last 30 minutes. And then over the next couple of days in the podcast, we are going to react to what we learned, the biggest takeaways coming out of OTA. So some big time news and nuggets coming through. Make sure you're subscribed. We're going to talk about all of it here on the Locked On Bills podcast. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.